Hello, good morning. How are you? Well, first of all, I'm sorry that I couldn't be with you today live in a video conference, but I had to go to the school. Nowadays, I cannot go, because of the alarm state in which we are in the country. So I had to ask for permission to go because I had to do some important things there, and they have given me this permission to go there. So that's why I couldn't be in the second video conference with you. But I have to say that I enjoyed a lot the video conferences that we had together with the two classes, with first C and third C. I just hit my hand so hard with the table. Um, it was really nice. I mean, there was a little bit of a difference between you two because Primero they have already had other video conferences with other teachers, so they knew how to do it, and it has been awesome. And I have learned a lot with you. And first C, it was super nice that you were seeing each other again for the first time. But I think that in the next one, you have to try to talk a little bit more. I will ask each one of you. So let's see if we can everybody talk, enjoy, practice a little bit English, and see each other. Okay? So, well, I will let you know when we have the following one. But today we're going to finish with the lesson. We're going to study fungi because it is the final part of it. We have already seen them in the previous lesson a little bit about their main characteristics, but today we're going to study them in detail. It's going to be very short because I don't want to go into too much detail, but I think that you really deserve to finish with these microorganisms. I will give you a task at the end, and then next week we will make a revision of everything with different quizzes and Kahoots and so on. Okay, I promise it will be fun. So let's go. As usual, let's see where we are. Oops, this is not our book, sorry, it's here. Remember that we are in lesson 2, simple life forms. We have studied viruses, monorans, prototists. Today we have to focus on fungi, okay? So first thing that you have to remember about fungi, that we have already seen this together, is that they are eukaryotic and they are heterotrophic organisms. I remember that someday I asked you if you thought if fungi were more similar to plants or to animals, and many of you said that they were more similar to plants, just because they live also in the soil, in the forests, and so on. Nothing at all, okay? They are even more alike to animals than to plants. So they are heterotrophic. We will study later how they perform nutrition, but they do have something in common with plants, and it is that their cells also have a cell wall. But this cell wall doesn't contain cellulose as the cells of plants, okay? So they have a cell wall that's something similar to plants, but they don't have chloroplasts, they don't do photosynthesis, they are not autotrophic. So remember, they are more alike to animals than they are to plants, okay? Nice, they grow as you have here in the soil, in dark, damp places, en sitios oscuros, húmedos. They feed on organic matter, and we normally can see them here in Spain, mainly in autumn, okay? September, October, sometimes some species in August, because they need these humid conditions to appear. We'll see later why and how, okay? So, what type of fungi do we have in our planet? There are mainly 3 types, okay? The first one are yeasts, las levaduras, that are single-celled, unicellular. Then we have molds, los mohos, and then we have mushrooms, which are setas, champiñones, and those kind of things, okay? So here you are some pictures, if I can, here. Here are some pictures. These are yeasts. We saw these pictures together. I remember when we started studying the different types of life forms that we were going to go into. So each of these is one cell, and they are yeasts. We use them for doing fermentations, okay? We will go for it later, but remember that this is what we use, for example, to make bread or any type of dough, cualquier tipo de masa, okay? Then these are, sorry, I hate this thing. These are the common molds that we normally have. They normally appear in different types of food that is decaying. And this is how we will see them through the microscope, okay? Even though when we see them through the naked eye, they look like this. If you take a sample of this and you place it under the microscope, this is what you see, okay? They can also appear over trunks of the trees, such as this one, for example, which looks like gelatinous or something like this. And yeah, this is the typical one that we normally have above our fruits or bread, another one in a trunk, or like this one, okay, many different kinds. And then we have mushrooms. We have plenty, I mean, hundreds of species, thousands of species. Some of them, they look very beautiful, such as this one, which is where it appears in many cartoons, yeah. But they are not very nice because these ones can be poisonous, some species, okay? We have to be really careful about which ones we consume because some of them are really poisonous and they can even cause death, okay, of the people who consume them. So, single-celled or multicellular? Yeasts in the case of single-celled, multicellular if we refer to molds or to mushrooms. If we focus a little bit in mushrooms, because they are very typical and we consume them with great normality, this is how they look inside. This is how we see a mushroom. Let me place it bigger. Okay, a mushroom is formed by a group of filaments that we call hyphae, las hifas, hyphae, okay? The mushroom itself, it lives below the ground, okay? It says here the entire mass of hyphae that forms the body of the fungus, this is the singular form, is called the mycelium. So we have a group of filaments. All together, we call them the mycelium. The filaments are called hyphae, las hifas con H in Spanish, and the mycelium, el micelio del hongo, that's what is composed by all these groups of filaments that we call hyphae. So one hyphae, that would be one filament, many hyphae together, that forms the mycelium. The real fungus lives below the ground. So what is the mushroom itself? Well, the mushroom, what we see, what we eat sometimes, it is just the reproductive part of the fungus. So it is like the flowers in plants, okay? Just that. That's why it just appears in some moments of the year, okay? Remember always that. The mushroom itself is the reproductive organ of the fungus that really lives below ground, okay? That's why, and I'm sure that many of you have gone to the forest to pick up mushrooms, yes, in autumn. Mainly here in Valladolid, we can pick up níscalos or setas de cardo. When you go to the countryside to take them, you should not just tear them apart from the ground. You really need to have a knife or a pair of scissors or something, and you need to cut it at the edge of the soil. Why? Because if you tear it off, si lo arrancáis del suelo, you're taking not only the mushroom, but the mycelium which is below. And if you're doing that, you're destroying the fungus, and probably next year we won't find any mushroom in that place. You see what I mean? So if you go to the countryside to pick up mushrooms, you always have to wear scissors or a knife, and you have to cut it instead of tear it apart from the soil, because in that case you would be destroying the real fungus. Okay? So remember, hyphae below the ground forming the mycelium, and just once per year, normally in humid conditions, they generate the mushroom itself, which is the reproductive organ. The mushroom is formed by the stalk, el tallo, que diríamos en castellano, and the cap, el sombrerito, or sombrerillo, we say in Spanish, okay? And below the cap, we have some fibers in which the mushroom produces spores, which is how they reproduce, okay? So remember that in the case of fungi, the mushroom itself is just the reproductive organ. Is that clear? Okay. There's other thing that you need to remember, and it is that as they produce spores, when you go and pick these mushrooms in the forest, you should not take with you a plastic bag. They normally tell you to use like a basket, una cestita de mimbre, because in that case, when you're picking up the mushrooms and you keep walking in the countryside, all the spores are going to be doing its function. They're going to be spread away. They're going past the holes that you have in your basket, and you're going to be helping with the reproduction of the fungi. If you just place the fungi inside a plastic bag, those spores are not going to be able to spread. So yeah, when you go to the countryside, you have to be really careful about that. In some cases, they can even ban you, te pueden hasta multar si te pillan con una bolsa de plástico y las setas. Well, it's just a curiosity. Okay, so let's move on. How do fungi perform the vital functions? Well, fungi, as we said before, the nutrition that they have is heterotrophic, and as usual, they can obtain their nutrients in different ways. The normal thing as they are is that they are saprotrophs. We have already studied this term. Saprotrophs means decomposers, so they decompose organic matter, which is decaying, such as, for example, rests of living organisms or rests of leaves from the trees, whatever. They take this organic matter and they transform it again into inorganic matter for the plants. Okay, so this is what they do. They are mainly, sorry, decomposers. They feed on the remains of other animals or plants, and they play an important role in the ecosystem. By digesting that matter, they put nutrients back into the soil, making them available to producers. So yeah, that's the typical thing that they do for nutrition. They just decompose organic matter. Some of them can be parasitic. Remember the term parasite? That means that they live on other organisms and they cause them a harm. They produce a disease or something in them. It's not very common, but we can suffer from them. We will see some examples later. And then finally, there are also symbiotic fungi. If you remember, a symbiosis was a relationship between two organisms in which they obtain a common benefit. And there's a very good example in the fungi kingdom about that, which is what we call the lichens, los líquenes en castellano. I'm sure that you know what they are. Lichens are these structures that we can normally find above the trunks of trees or sometimes even above rocks. Um, they are not really just one organism. A lichen is formed by two organisms. One of it is a fungi and the other one is an algae. They live together, so you cannot distinguish the fungi and the algae in that structure, and they obtain a common benefit, which is, in the case of algae, it is able to do the photosynthesis, so it gives nutrients to the lichen itself. And in the case of the fungi, it is going to give support to the structure and it is going to obtain the water that it requires. So it's like they are together, you cannot distinguish the two of them, and they work together for a common benefit, which is staying alive, really. Do we use lichens for something? Well, in some countries they use them to feed organisms or sometimes to obtain dyes from them. Se obtienen tintes de algunas especies. But it is very important the role that they play as environmental indicators, because they are very, how to say it, they are really affected by pollution. So if you have a very clean environment with no pollution, lichens can survive in that environment. But if there is pollution in that environment, then they are going to start dying. So it is a good indicator for people who are working in this, in environmental protection, to see if an environment is clear or not related with atmospheric pollution. They are really affected by atmospheric pollution. So we use them as environmental or atmospheric health indicators. Okay. So nutrition done. They can be normally saprotrophs, parasitic, and some of them symbiotic. Remember with the example of lichens, which are formed by a fungus and an algae. How do they reproduce? Well, mainly asexually with spores, as I told you before. Some species can have sexual reproduction, but it is not very, very common. And finally, interaction. I cannot say something about how they interact. They are immobile and they are not, well, maybe you have heard a fungi talking or something, or just rising up and running. No, they don't really have a very impressive way of interacting with the rest of the environment. They cannot move, so we're not going to comment about these things. Okay. Sorry. So 3 vital functions done: nutrition heterotrophic, reproduction mainly asexual, and in the case of interaction, they cannot move. How do we classify them? We just saw it at the very beginning. We classify them according to the number of cells that they have. They can be unicellular if we are referring to yeasts. You have another picture here in your book. And they can be multicellular if we're talking about moths, los moths, or mushrooms, the different types of species that we have. Okay, as usual, when we are finishing each of the kingdoms, we talk about the importance that they have. We have mentioned some things, but we're going to remember some others. So why are they important in ecosystems? We have commented that before. They are decomposers. So they return nutrients to the environment for plants to keep doing the photosynthesis and being the producers of the rest of the ecosystem. Without them and without bacteria that also perform this function, ecosystems would not work. Okay, so they're super, super important. Then in industry and food production, well, there are many mushrooms that we eat, that we consume. I just mentioned before níscalos or seta de cardo, but then there are boletus, champiñones, whatever you can think about. There are plenty of species that we consume. But then we have to be really careful because there are other species which are super poisonous. I'm going to show you some examples. Okay, here you have a list. You can look for it in internet. This one is very typical here in Spain, the death cap, La Amanita phalloides. It doesn't have like a very dangerous appearance or something, but it is really, really poisonous. If you consume it, it says here within 6 to 12 hours after consumption, you will have violent abdominal pain, vomiting, bloody diarrhea, causing rapid loss of fluid from tissues and intense thirst. Then it can affect the liver, the kidneys, the central nervous system, and finally, if you don't go to the doctor, these conditions leads to coma and death in more than 50% of the incidents. So that's a lot. The dangerous thing is that this type of mushroom is very similar to other mushrooms that we can consume. So if you're not an expert, you should not consume never mushrooms that you find in the forest or something, because they may seem something that we normally eat, and then they are a total different thing, and that can cause you death. Okay, so be careful with that. You have other examples here. Some of them are present in Spain, some others not. But well, as I was saying, be really, really very careful, because even though they look like something that you find that is not very poisonous or something, because I see this and I find it, this is poisonous for sure. But I see this thing and I say, well, it looks like a champignon. But you should be really, really careful with that, okay? Because they can look like something which is not dangerous, and finally they are dangerous. And believe me, the poison that they have is really strong for humans. It affects vital organs directly, and it is not, it's really something serious when some people consume this type of mushrooms, okay? Careful with that. And then to finish, we're almost finishing. In food production, yeah, I mean, we cannot understand the way that we eat without yeasts, because we need them, for example, to produce bread, and we also use them to produce a lot of alcoholic drinks that we have. For example, we use yeasts to change from grape juice to wine. We use yeast as the same, and at the same time to produce beer, la cerveza, or to produce rum, el ron. Many types of alcoholic drinks are produced with these yeasts. And how do they work? It's pretty simple, really. Yeasts, what they do is that they consume the sugars that we have in the dough, en la masa del pan, or in the orange juice, no, in the grape juice to produce the wine. They feed on the sugar that is present there, and they produce, in the case of bread, it produces as a result carbon dioxide, which is a gas, and that makes the dough gets bigger and bigger. That's what when we use yeast, cuando usamos levadura, what we are getting is that the dough is growing up because of the production of this gas. And in the case of alcoholic drinks, these yeasts, what they do is that they also consume the sugar, but in that case they produce alcohol, so they turn this juice into an alcoholic drink. Okay, and I found this picture really funny because it says here, while the yeast are eating, they start to burp, producing carbon dioxide gas, and this gas is what makes bread to rise. O sea que cuando las levaduras están comiendo ese azúcar, pues lo que hacen es que se tiran así como eructillos y producen dióxido de carbono, y por eso hacen que la masa crezca. I found it really funny for you to understand the process. And to finish, now yes, I promise. The final importance of fungi is that we use them in medicine because they are able to produce antibiotics. Yep. The antibiotics that we use to treat our bacterial infections, remember that, are produced by fungi. So they are super important. And the activity that I want you to do today is related with this. I will tell you in a minute what you have to do, okay? And then they're also important because they produce some diseases in us, such as, for example, the athlete's foot, el pie de atleta, los hongos en los pies, which is very itchy and very uncomfortable. And then in your book, I think you have another one, the thrush, sorry, is like candidiasis, which affects the genital area. Okay. So, what do you think? It's very, very nice to understand because we normally know many things about plants and animals, but those types of organisms, they are more common in our life that we normally think. So remember, as usual, the structure. Okay, in the case of the mushroom, we have focused a little bit in how it looks like, what is the function. Remember that it is just the reproductive organ. We have seen the vital functions as usual, with the different types of nutrition, reproduction, and interaction. Classification very easy according to the number of cells. And finally, the importance as usual. Final task that I want you to do about this. I want you to investigate about the discovery of antibiotics. Nowadays, while we're suffering, we have talked about it, sanitary crisis. We are super, super prepared for this type of diseases, infectious diseases. But years ago, we didn't even have antibiotics or anything to treat these infectious diseases. So I want you to investigate about the discovery of the first antibiotics. I want you to investigate who was the person discovering them, how did he discover them, because it is kind of funny, and what was this first antibiotic that he discovered, and when. So who, when, how, and what was the other question? And which one? Okay, I will write the activity, don't worry, in Edmodo for you to do it. So it is a tiny investigation about this with 5-6 lines, it would be enough. And then, as usual, do your notes about this part of the lesson to finish it completely done. Okay, I hope that you like this video. As usual, I'm very happy with the feedback that you're sending me with these videos, and I hope that you like the lesson. I will try to think about funny activities and games next week to revise all these concepts, okay? So until then, remember to do the activity about antibiotics, remember to do your notes. We'll see each other around here, okay? Bye bye. Big kiss.